Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Let's get right into it because we are looking at something huge today. The absolute historic stakes of the upcoming 2028 Philippine elections. Based on the most recent data and all the wild political developments up through June 2026, the landscape has rapidly consolidated into what our sources are calling the dual pillars of polarization. It's basically a giant political chess match. On one side, we have Vice President Sara Duterte, and on the other, Senator Risa Hontiveros. Now, understanding this dynamic isn't just about guessing who might run for president next. It's about understanding a truly defining moment for the nation's institutional future.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is how we'll map out our journey through these complex institutional battlegrounds. First, we'll look at the 2028 election referendum, followed by the impeachment reality that's currently unfolding. Then, we'll examine the recent Senate battlefield, compare their track records in reform versus anomalies, and finally, look at how all of this is shaping the electorate.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the 2028 election referendum, testing the rule of law.
The overarching theme emerging from the data is that this upcoming presidential race, it's a fundamental test of the rule of law itself. We're looking at a super stark dichotomy here. On one side, you have Vice President Sara Duterte, a populist executive who, according to our sources, is currently the subject of the state's most severe accountability mechanisms. And directly opposed to her in this political landscape is Senator Risa Hontiveros, a legislative figure who has actively used institutional oversight to challenge power and drive that very accountability. So we're really seeing two entirely distinct relationships with the concept of governance playing out in real time.
Which brings us to Section 2, the impeachment reality, historic legal jeopardy.
And wow, that theoretical dichotomy, it is absolutely materialized into unprecedented legal jeopardy. 257 to 25. That was the decisive, historic tally in the House of Representatives on May 11, 2026. With that overwhelming majority, the House formally impeached Vice President Duterte for a second time. I mean, this is a staggering institutional moment. It literally makes her the first sitting vice president in Philippine history to face this level of formal legal jeopardy.
The charges against her include betrayal of public trust, graft, and bribery. And they're backed by some severe evidentiary findings from the April 2026 House hearings. For instance, the Anti-Money Laundering Council flagged 6.7 billion pesos in suspicious transactions linked to the vice president and her husband. Also, the National Bureau of Investigation actually testified that signatures on the Office of the Vice President's confidential fund receipts were outright forged. And in a truly wild detail, the Philippine Statistics Authority confirmed that a massive 60% of the named recipients of Department of Education confidential funds had absolutely no civil registry records. To put that into perspective, more than half of the people on that list officially don't exist in the registry.
So the crucial point here is that these House findings have now escalated way past the investigation phase. The Senate has formally convened as an impeachment court, and the trial is officially scheduled to begin on July 6, 2026. For everyday citizens, this means the highest levels of government are literally about to be put on trial, making the institutional stakes higher than they have ever been.
Moving right along to Section 3, the Senate battlefield, the struggle for control.
Because the Senate essentially acts as the jury in an impeachment, this looming trial sparked a dramatic, high-stakes struggle for control over the Senate's leadership and, by extension, the entire narrative of the proceedings. Just look at how fast this went down. Recognizing the threat, a pro-Duterte bloc moved on May 11, literally the exact same day as the House impeachment vote, to install Alan Peter Cayetano as Senate president, trying to control the trial's direction. But that was met with fierce resistance. By June 3, 2026, a minority coalition executed a successful counter-coup, ousting Cayetano and electing Sherwin Gatchalian as the acting Senate president. It was a total whirlwind.
And right in the middle of this institutional tug-of-war was Senator Hontiveros. By aligning with that minority coalition, she directly impacted the balance of power. Following that successful June 3 maneuver, Hontiveros actually regained her powerful committee chairmanships. Political analysts in our sources widely framed this move as restoring the Senate's independence just weeks before Duterte's trial was set to kick off.
Let's move to Section 4, reform versus anomalies, contrasting records.
Let's see how this all builds into the stark contrast of their actual public service records during this highly turbulent period. The source data points to one massive, unavoidable figure, 612.5 million pesos. Right now,
Vice President Duterte's executive legacy is heavily defined by the allegations and the sheer scale of the scandal surrounding the alleged misuse of these confidential funds during her time at both the Office of the Vice President and the Department of Education. It's quite a contrast. While Duterte's tenure at DepEd reported a classroom completion rate of just 3%, Senator Hontiveros maintained a relentless pace of legislative output. She successfully shepherded the Philippine Geriatric Center Act and the Autism Care and Inclusion Act through the Senate. Plus, as the newly elected chair of the Senate Committee on Electoral Reforms, she just secured committee-level approval for a crucial anti-political dynasty bill. And simultaneously, she used her oversight role to expose massive anomalies, literally leading the charge against a 1 trillion peso flood control scam involving the Department of Public Works and Highways.
Now you might be asking, why does this matter to the electorate? Well, because systemic issues don't just stay trapped in Senate chambers. The Pulse-Asia report brilliantly illustrates this. Events like the Trillion Peso March saw citizens pouring into the streets to demand transparency and accountability from the government. The public is directly reacting to the flood control scandal exposed by these exact legislative probes.
Finally, Section 5, Shaping the Electorate, Voter Behavior for 2028.
So, how are these wildly diverging track records actively shaping voter behavior as we look ahead to 2028? Well, the polling data reveals a highly engaged but deeply divided public. Public satisfaction metrics have been shifting constantly amid the ongoing investigations. What we're seeing from the recent survey releases is that plurality sentiments strongly reflect the deep political divide separating the nation right now. If we break down the May 2026 Pulse-Asia and Strat-based polling, we see a clear consolidation happening. While the data shows Duterte continues to lead early multi-candidate presidential preference polls, when you look at a direct head-to-head matchup, she holds a preference of 51% against Senator Hontiveros, who comes in at a formidable 41%. Voters are clearly, definitively organizing themselves behind these two entirely distinct political figures.
Now what's really interesting here is the geographic breakdown. The polarization is absolutely staggering. In Mindanao, Duterte commands a massive 91% trust rating, compared to just 7% for the liberal opposition base. This tells us that Duterte's strategy of framing the impeachment and corruption charges against her as political persecution, it continues to resonate deeply, keeping her base highly consolidated, despite the severity of those evidentiary findings we talked about earlier.
Conversely, Senator Hontiveros has earned the highest net favorability rating in the entire Senate, sitting right at 46%. Sources indicate her strategy is to position herself as this unblemished foil to these ongoing controversies, focusing her messaging firmly on systemic checks and balances, anti-corruption, and the defense of the West Philippine Sea. And this messaging is successfully consolidating the liberal, progressive, and centrist voters who are just increasingly alienated by dynastic politics and corruption scandals.
Which brings us to the ultimate question as we wrap up this explainer. The lines are drawn. The trial is set. So in 2028, will the electorate prioritize populist loyalty, standing by an embattled executive? Or will they demand institutional accountability, backing the reformist legislator? How these dual pillars of polarization resolve will undoubtedly decide the future of the nation's democratic institutions. Thank you so much for joining me as we unpack these sources. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.